What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto wasn't loved by his family so he made the world worship him instead? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. Naruto Uzumaki was a smart man, at least, he liked to think so. He wanted to believe that he would always be there for his friends when they needed him the most and would take a sword for them if he could save them. And it felt like now was one of those times as he looks down. And deep within his gut was a sword. He coughed hard as he let out a bit of blood from his mouth as he looks up, the former captain of the Soul Society holding the blade as he pulls it free. Weak, was all Sosuke Aizen says. He looks back at his lieutenant, Syen, who he had saved from his blade as he gives her his infamous smile. It was seconds after when Aizen yanks the sword free from Naruto's gut, before stabbing him in the lungs, just to be sure before he kicks him off his blade and watches as the man drops to the earth below. One down, was the only thought that lingered in Aizen's mind as he looks around for his next target. Naruto-sama, she yells out, almost shocked that he took the blade for her. Tears streaking down her face as she watches as the man she absolutely worshipped fall to the earth below. Naruto watched as she flew down after him, no doubt trying to save him. By this point he had been in the Soul Society for about 300 years. He had aged a bit from the time he died, around 16, to now, he was, by this point, looking like a mini Minato. He had died prematurely, he felt like, the Akatsuki managing to get a hold of him and extracting Kurama. Yet somehow became his Zanpakuto. Fate had a funny way of doing things, like when he had rose the ranks fast, becoming, much like Toshiro, captain relatively quickly. Becoming captain of the 2nd Division was one of those things he enjoyed, feeling like, even if it was not Hokage, something that his father and mother was proud of. He smiled as he remembered the first time he met Syen. Flashback. Naruto Uzumaki was currently training in the 2nd Division area as he delivered a rather hard kick to a tree, causing it to splinter as he let out a small breath. He had been training his body for the past few weeks now, feeling confident in his Zanpakuto. He never liked to mix up his trainings. If he wanted to train something, he would dedicate weeks, if not months to it to make sure he had a good proficiency in it before moving on to the next set of skills. Satisfied with the power of his kick, at least for the day, he grabs a towel and wipes his face of sweat before feeling someone was watching him. Setting his towel down on one of the training dummies, he grabbed his captain's haori and slips it back onto his body. I know you're there. Why don't you come out? He says to whoever is hiding as he watches as a 10-ish-year-old looking girl steps out and he smiles as he looks at her. And who might you be? He asks the girl. I am Syen of the Fawn family, she says proudly as she looked like she had stars in her eyes. He was captain of the 2nd Division, so no doubt she's heard of him as he laughs as he walks over to her and rubs her hair, causing her to pout. Nice to meet you Syen, I am Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, captain of the 2nd Division, he says to her. He had a feeling that she would be a good apprentice to him. Something calling out to him about her and he usually always followed his gut. What are you doing here? I wanted to watch you train Naruto-sama. You're so cool, she says with a smile as he let out another hearty laugh at what she says as he kneels down to match her eye level and looks at her. Well, instead of watching me train, how about I show you how to be cool like me? He says to her as he watches her as her eyes light up more as she nods. He could tell she would be a fast learner. And a lifelong friend. Alright, let's begin Syen. I won't take it easy on you, he tells her. Hi, she says as they make it over to the training dummies. Flashback end. He smiled almost sadly. That was almost 200 years ago, and she was a quick learner like he had thought. Of course, she was also trained by her clan, and originally, she was going to be under Yoruichi, but he convinced them to have her become his student. They almost became inseparable by the time she reached to be his lieutenant. She was his confidant and she was his guardian, his protector, something she took great pride in and he appreciated her, often letting her know that. And he busted her ass in training to make sure she could keep up with him. No matter how much it hurt her. Flashback. Smash. Two legs clashed against one another creating a shockwave before the two fighters stepped back, both panting as it was the captain and his lieutenant. Naruto and Syen as sweat beaded their bodies. By now she was a full adult, her Zanpakuto fully realized and ready to defend her captain and crush, though she would never admit that. At least, not out loud, and would kill anyone if they even insinuated it. Though she did receive her fair share of teasing from Yoruichi, who saw the love-struck eyes of the woman. To which Soifun denied it and often calls it indecent, that she would not have feelings for her captain, and even if she did that they would never be returned. "You're getting stronger," Naruto says as he panted. He had taught her almost everything he knew, besides a few things he kept for himself. "Thank you, Naruto-sama," she says, giving a smile to her captain as she too was panting. Working out with him was always a workout that she had learned rather quickly when he initially took her on as his protégé, as he made sure anything he did with her would make her stronger. He never did anything without reason. "You do realize we're not stopping now, right?" he asks with a grin before he stepped off and darted towards her as he threw yet another kick as she did the same towards him, their shins clashing once more. Smash, smash, smash. To the untrained eye, all they would see was air explosions as the two masters of speed and stealth clashed against one another. But just because they focused on their speed and stealth did not mean they weren't helpless, as anyone would be able to feel the power of their kicks as they smashed into one another. It would not be too much longer before they finally called it quits in their hand-to-hand fighting as they both leaned against the wall. As he gave her his signature grin, putting his hands behind his head as he looks at her. "You took my training like a fish to water. Just like me with pervy Sage, she's become one of my most precious people," he thought to himself. "There's just one thing I haven't taught her." He smiles as she was recovering from their spar as she caught him staring as she raised an eyebrow at him. "You okay, Naruto-sama?" she asks curiously as he stares at her for a long moment before he chuckles. "Yes, I think you're ready," he says to her as he motions for her to follow him back out into the clearing of the field. "I think it's time I taught you something of a legacy I've inherited," he says to her as her eyes go wide. "Naruto-sama, I don't think I'm worthy to," she began before he raised his hand as they stopped. In the middle of their clearing. "It's all right, I think you're ready," he says, walking over and putting his hand on her shoulder, and gives her the usual goofy grin that he was known for, reassuring her that she was indeed ready for what he was going to teach her. "My father created this technique. My godfather taught it to me. And now I think you're ready. I'm going to teach you the Rasengan," he says to her. Flashback end. Of course, he had adapted the chakra-based jutsu into a ritsu-based one, basically having to learn the same technique twice, but he did not care. It was one of the few things that he had gotten from his father and was going to pass it on to his protégés and his children. A sort of passing of the baton. His body finally hit the ground of the fake Karakura town as the hole in his stomach bled profusely, his own Zanpakuto landing next to him with a clang as he watched his student rushing down to him, watching as the others battled far above him as he smiles. He didn't regret for a moment the decisions he's made in his life. Protecting Soifun, protecting Ichigo and his friends. He always followed his heart where it led him. He took after his mother in that regard. And he was happy with that. He did what he felt was the right thing. Consequences be damned. And if that meant clashing against Yamamoto, then so be it. He did just that. "Naruto-sama, please," Soifun cried as she kneeled next to him, tears streaming down her face. "Don't leave me," she says as she continued to cry as he smiles up at her and reaches up, palming her cheek as he used the thumb to rub away her tears. "I always knew you had a heart, Soifun," he says half-heartedly, since she was always stoic and took her job extremely seriously, to the point that it intimidated her underlings. It even led to a few clashes between the two at times. Flashback. "Naruto-sama," Soifun calls out, absolutely irate with her captain as he sits. She often conflicted with his need to do the right thing over the lawful thing at times, but she never resented him for it, knowing it was a quirk of her captain which she adored. This is one of those times as Rukia was set to be executed and he absolutely disagreed. He yelled at the head captain about the decision. "I know you're mad with me, Soifun-chan," he tells her as he looks at her. In his lap was a cup of tea. He looks up from his tea at her directly. He respected her too much to not look her in the eyes. "Why?" was all she asked regarding the intruders as she wanted to throttle her captain and crush as he smiles at her. "Soifun, you should know me by now. I've never been one to follow the rules if I think I am doing the wrong thing," he says to her as she was less irate now before taking a few breaths to calm down somewhat as she kneels at the table as well. "But they're intruders, Naruto-sama. We could have apprehended them by now and be done with them," she says as she watches as Naruto sets down his tea on the table. Soifan, one of the many creeds I live by is. He began before she interrupted him, knowing exactly he was going to say, as it was one of the things he constantly taught his squad. Those who break the rules are scum, but those who abandon their friends are worse than scum. She says as he nods. She knew him too well. Then you know that I sympathize with them. If the roles were reversed, if it was you to be executed, I would move heaven and hell to bring you back. He says to her as she was taken aback by these words, a light flush across her cheeks before coughing into her hand to fight down the blush. All right Naruto-sama, she says, giving in this time since she knew her teacher by now. This was one of those things that he was not going to relent on, as she gave a small smile. She may not agree with his viewpoints, but he stuck by them. And she respected that. Flashback end. Naruto-sama, please don't joke at a time like this, she says as she continued to cry as he kept rubbing her tears away, some landing on his cheek as he coughs out more blood. I'm sorry Soifan, he says to her. He knew what it was like to lose a teacher. To have that feeling of emptiness, and he was about to give her what he felt when he lost Jiraiya. He hated knowing that, but at the very least he knew that she would recover with Yoruichi and, as much as she did not like him, Urahara, one of his own closest friends despite being exiled still. Naruto-sama, please don't leave me. She began to say as she began to choke up as she wanted the words she's been wanting to say for centuries to come out. I love you, she says as she pressed her forehead against his chest, clinging to his haori for dear life, as if asking, begging him not to leave her. To leave her alone. I'm sorry Soifan, I love you too. I'm sorry I couldn't return your feelings before, he says to her as he felt his life began to leave his body as she only clung harder to his robe. He had been with her for so long, trained her. And now he was dying. It would take a long time for her to recover. If at all. He felt his life slip through his fingers before he felt something. A portal opened beneath the both of them as they were dragged through to somewhere. It was quick and sudden, and they had barely any time to register anything before they fell through. Just my luck, was all he thought. Shinigami Chambers. The god of death was what you consider a patient man. Watching things play out and making his moves then. He had to be. All things died in the end, and in order for them to find his way to Hueco Mundo or the Soul Society, he had to be patient. Life and death were an integral part of the balance that kept the worlds going. Him and Kami-sama kept the balance of power. A push and pull, give and take, yin and yang, things had to be perfect. And they were for millennia. Until now. Until Sosuke Aizen. He made a mess of everything. So in order to put the balance of power where it was, he had to do a do-over. Something he had spoken to Kami about. It wasn't long before the one that he had summoned landed in his chambers, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. What surprised him was the +1 that he brought with him when he opened the portal. Usually he wasn't so careless. We meet again Namikaze-san. The Shinigami calls out, deciding to at least look more hospitable than the god of death that most in the elemental nations saw him as he looked completely human with the usual Shinigami robes. And you must be his student, Soifan, correct? He asks as Naruto laughs. Good to see you, old man, he says, coughing up another glob of blood. Soifan's eyes widen as she recognized who this was. This was the Shinigami King, brother to Kami. Yes, Shinigami-sama, she says, bowing to him. She honestly never thought that she would meet the Shinigami King. She never saw herself as any more important than any other lieutenant of the Gode 13. As the Shinigami smirks as he walks over to Naruto, who is still bleeding all over the floor. Good, he says, waving his hand over Naruto, which healed his wounds as Naruto felt the energy began to return to his body, as he sat up, rubbing where the stab mark used to be as he took a deep breath, as if taking his first breath for the first time. He was about to stand before he was tackled by a red-eyed Soifan who was still emotional for almost losing her captain and her crush once more. I'm alright Soifan, he says to her as he turns his head before pressing his forehead against hers, as the Shinigami let them have their moment before he watched as the two stood up. Naruto, picking up his Zanpakuto and slipping it back into his sheath. What did you need us for, old man Gami? Soifan was about to reprimand him for talking to him that way as the god laughs at him. Your version of respect him? He says as Naruto gave him the usual goofy grin as he shakes his head. As much as I would like to catch up. No, I have business to ask of you. I am sure you know by now what Aizen is attempting. And as much as I do not like to admit it, he is getting dangerously close to achieving those goals. he says as Soifan's eyes widen at this. She knew he was dangerous but not this dangerous. I've already spoken to my sister, and she realizes the dire straits we are in. We never interfere unless it is absolutely necessary. And this is one of those times, he says as he looks at him. What did you need, old man? He asks him, his hands moving to behind his head. He was worried about his comrades, sure, but if this was dangerous enough to warrant the Shinigami King to intervene, then it was much bigger than a few lives, even though he hated saying that. He wanted to rush out and save them now that he was fully healed. Me and my sister talked about the few ways we could intervene, but none had more merit than making sure the events never take place at all. He says as he takes a step forward and puts his hand on Naruto's shoulders and looks at him square in the eyes. I am going to send you back in time, before your premature death, to change the past. I do not care how you do it, but I want you to rid this world of Aizen. But do not be stupid about it either. I am giving you a second chance. Don't end up imprisoned because you gutted him as a toddler, he says, showing that he did indeed have compassion as Naruto snorts. Don't worry, if I'm going to kill Aizen, it's going to be the right way. He says as the Shinigami nods, thankful. But, before I go, before you send me back, why me, old man? He asks the god. He always knew he was the child of prophecy and that he died prematurely, but he didn't think that was enough to really earn him any special treatment. He always thought that he was nothing special. Sure, he was the Jinchuriki for Kurama, but that was really about it. Sure, his father was Hokage, but that wasn't really anything, at least in his eyes, to earn him any special treatment from a god. Because I trust you, was all he said, and this causes Naruto to almost choke on his spit at this as Soifan was looking at him with wide eyes. Yes, the Shinigami King trusted his guard with his life, but that was only a select few people and nothing to the magnitude as this. Her captain truly was special. She felt like she was a child all over again, meeting him for the first time. Also, I want Soifan to come with me. Done, was all he said as he pulls the signature kodachi from his waist, the one he usually had in his mouth in his true form, and swiped it left in an open area, opening the portal to where they needed to go. You will be taking over your old self, so to speak. You will have everything with you, your Haori, your skills, your Zanpakuto, and Soifan will appear next to you. Do not disappoint me. I am placing a lot of faith in you, child of prophecy. Also, I might send you friends to assist you on your journey. It won't be immediate, but this job is far too large for just 2 people to handle alone. I won't let you down, old man. I gotta be my father's son after all, he says with a grin as he looks at Soifan, who nods, taking her hand into his as they step up to the portal. This was it, a chance to right all the wrongs. To do things right this time with feeling. And with one step, they walked into the portal. To face whatever trials and tribulations together. Konohagakure, centuries earlier. Naruto wakes up with a gasp as he bolts up from his bed as he looks around. His old apartment. He smiles lightly as he takes the sight in, something he had not seen for a long, long time. He could not wait until he walked around the village and taken all the sights again. He looked down at his body, and as promised from the Shinigami King, his clothes and Zanpakuto had followed him. He will have to modify his wardrobe, but there was no way in hell he was going to leave his captain's robe behind. Sure, he'll get rid of the usual Shinigami clothes, but much like his father's signature Haori, he was not about to give up his captain's Haori. Nope, no way, no how. He had to figure out when he was, as he felt strange having his old body again, alive, but he climbs out of bed and looks at the calendar. Just after he came back from the training trip with Pervy Sage. Good. A lot of things to fix. He could not wait to introduce Soifan to all his old friends and comrades. To his godmother, though maybe he should warn her before he introduced her to Jiraiya. Lord knows how that is going to go. Speaking of which, he looked around before moving to the living room of his apartment and saw her napping on his couch. He smiles as he walks over and strokes her cheek. Soifan, Soifan, wake up, he calls out to her as he watched her eyes flutter open as she roused from her sleep. He does not know why he did not pursue their relationship further before, but honestly, he didn't care. He had her now and he was going to have the time of his 2 lives with her. Again, consequences be damned. Naruto-sama, she asks as she awoke before she finally caught sight of him. He stroking her cheek before the wave of memories bombarded her as tears welled up in her eyes as she shoots up from her lying down and pulls him into a hug. I thought I was going to lose you. she whispers as she holds him close, tears streaming down her face. To anyone else they would have thought they entered the Twilight Zone, because Soifan was showing emotion besides anger and even crying. "I'm alright, Soifan. I am alright. I love you," he finally tells her as he strokes her back as he held her close, moving where he sat on the couch and holds her close. It took her a good solid few minutes before she calmed down as she slowly returned to her usual self. "I love you too, Naruto-sama," she says to him with a soft smile as she looks up at him, not moving from his lap. Now that they were a couple, she could do all the things that she had been wanting to do. It takes her another long minute to realize where they were. And when they were. "So, Shinigami-sama was telling the truth, he did send us back in time," she says as he nods. "Yes, that just means we will have to do it right. I know you don't know where we are and when we are so ill having to bring you up to speed, but for the most part, as long as you stay close by, we should have no issues," he tells her as she nods as she finally and begrudgingly gets up off her lover's lap. He stood from the couch as he looks around. It had been so long, but he still remembered everything. And he was glad he did. "If I remember correctly," he whispers as Soifan watched her lover look around before making his way to one of the cupboards before he smiles as he grabs a little toad wallet. "Ah, there you are, Gama-chan," he says with a grin. "Gama-chan?" she asks curiously as he nods, popping it open to reveal a wad of cash. "It was a gift. I was sad I couldn't bring this with me, but it was one of the first gifts I had ever gotten," he says as he looks down. "I wasn't well loved at this point in my life. So I took any gifts I could receive and they became precious to me because they were the small little things that reminded me that people actually loved me." The old man, pervy sage, Ba-chan, he says with a smile. But now they were all alive again. "So we're going to go buy something?" she asks as she was kneeling on the floor by now. Yes, she was with her lover, but that didn't mean she wasn't going to stop being his protector and confidant. This just meant that she could express her feelings, go out on dates and the like. And it swelled her heart up with joy at this. "Yep, we need to buy you some clothes. I still have some of mine here since this was after all my apartment, but we have to either order you sets like yours or get you ninja attire. Then after that I have to take you to go meet Ba-chan and register you to make sure you can head out on missions with me," he explains as he walks over to the headband he had left on the counter and wraps it around his forehead. It was nice to wear Aruka's headband once more. It's kind of funny, when he died, he was saddened he couldn't bring these things with him, but now here he was wearing these things once more. It's the little things he supposed as he takes the money out of the wallet and began to count it. He nods in content before slipping the money back into his wallet before he slips the wallet away in his pants. Walking back to his room, he grabs his Zanpakuto and wraps it to his waist. For now, he'll wear his Shinigami clothing one last time before he changes. "Who is Ba-chan, Naruto-sama?" she asks curiously as he made sure everything he needed was on him. "She's the leader of the village and my godmother. Don't worry, you'll meet her soon enough, though you might draw comparison to a outgoing Shinigami," he says with a small snicker as they walk out the apartment as he locks it up. "Don't worry, she'll like you. I hope." Naruto was almost reminiscing being here after so long, hands at his sides, in his captain's haori, getting some heated looks from people, but he paid them no mind. It was a rather beautiful day for the most part, not a single cloud in the sky. A light breeze blew, his hair swaying. It almost felt surreal if he was completely honest. He hums as he made a mental checklist of what they had to do today. Get her Soifan clothes, register her, find out when exactly he came back so that he is able to prepare for the next plan of attack. His mind bouncing ideas back and forth as they continued to walk towards their destination, Higurashi Weapon Shop. Soifan walking dutifully closely behind, eyes moving around, as if daring anyone to attack her captain and lover. Her hand occasionally twitching to her Zanpakuto on her waist when she saw the civilian gave the occasional sneer, but otherwise they made no move to strike her or her captain just yet. This was all a new experience for her, being in a land she didn't understand, being alive. It'll take some getting used to, but she knew that as long as she was with her lover that she knew that she would be alright. And that's all she needed. She noticed that she too got some leers from the civilians, some of disgust, some of lust, as her eyes twitched but otherwise done nothing, at least until one civilian decided that he wanted to try and be brave. "Hey demon, catch," he calls out holding a brick as he chucks it as hard as he could at his head, knowing that if he killed he wasn't looking or paying attention. A prime target if you asked him, not thinking too much of Syen that walked close by. And in one swift motion, she turns and grabs the brick from the air as she gave him a glare. "How dare you try and harm Naruto-sama? I'll have your head," she says as she throws the brick to the floor, shattering it before she reaches to grab her sword, only for Naruto to grab her shoulder before she could do anything drastic. "Leave it alone, Syen, he's not worth it," he tells her with his signature smile as she looks up at him before nodding, moving her hand from her Zanpakuto as they continued onto their destination. This incident caused people to cautiously step back from them too, seeing that she had no issues causing harm to them if they wanted to harm the demon brat. Syen was slowly thinking that she didn't like the village, especially with how they treated her lover, but decided to let it go as she returns to her normal stoic self. It seemed Naruto didn't let the hate get to him, so why should she? They continued their trek through the village before they finally made it to their destination, and it was a rather large weapon emporium. Swords of all kinds as well as kunai and shuriken, including sealing tags for sale as well, or explosive tags. And in another part of the store there was armor and clothing for shinobi as he nods. "This is one of my friends and her father's store, they'll give us what we need," he tells her as she nods as she follows him into the store. Higurashi Weapon Emporium. Behind the desk was Ten, who was currently looking bored out of her mind as she flipped the pages of her book. They could hear the faint sound of a hammer in the back, which he could only assume was his father crafting even more weapons for the shinobi corps. The man, from what he remembered, was a hard worker through and through. The bell on the door rang as this caused Ten to look up from her book as she brightened when she saw who it was. "Ah, Naruto. Nice to see you," she says, trying to hide the fact that she was bored out of her mind as he snorts lightly as he walks further into the store. "It's good to see you too, Ten, but there's no shame in being bored, you know," he says with a snicker as she blushes lightly as she hides the book under the counter before she raised her hand to her mouth and coughed into it as she tried to hide her blush. Anyway, what can I do for you, Naruto? And who's this?" she asks, noticing how close Syen was to Naruto as the lieutenant of the 2nd Division was currently watching her with a stoic expression. It almost reminded her of Neji if she were completely honest. "This is a friend, her name is Syen. I met in Iron Country and she just arrived last night. She didn't bring anything with her and I was wondering if you can help her make copies of her clothing as well as setting her up with a supply of kunai and shuriken," he says as Ten nods as pulls a small box set of kunai and shuriken for the woman and sets it on the counter. "Alright, I have your set ready. Come with me and I'll take your measurements to be able to make your clothing," the weapon mistress says as she motions for her to follow her. "You stay here," Ten warned Naruto, not wanting him to peek as Naruto did nothing but give them a smile as Syen nods at the girl as she followed her to the back. "Will this take long?" Syen asks as she makes her way with her until they made it into one of the other rooms filled with cloth, sewing supplies and armor and other things. "Shouldn't be a few minutes. Now, I need you to remove your clothes so I can get the measurements of your body," she says as the shinobi of the 2nd Division nods as she began to do just that, laying her Zanpakuto on one of the dressers, leaving on her undergarments as Ten grabbed a measuring tape and some paper and pencil. "Arms up," she says as Syen nods as she began to take measurements of the petite woman. "So, how do you know Naruto?" she asks her, trying to understand who this woman was as she began to measure her hips as she wrote everything down as well, making sure to take everything down so that she was able to make copies of her clothing. "We met when he was training and offered to train me," she says simply as she didn't want to reveal more than she had to as she let the girl beneath her do what she needed to do as she looks down at her. "That's it? Come on, why did you come all the way from Iron Country to be with him? And no, you cannot tell me. I saw your eyes dart to him every couple of seconds, I've seen that look," she says as Ten gives her a look as Syen was inwardly groaning. She didn't think she was that obvious, but she guesses that she didn't think that Ten would care. "Ask him, Ten-san. We have our own secrets is all I will say," she says, which causes the panda girl to huff and continue her work before sketching the outfit she was wearing as she nods in contentment. "Alright, you can go ahead and put your clothes back on, Syen-san," she says as the ninja nods and grabs her clothes before she began to put them on before slipping the sword back onto her waist and securing it snugly. Ten desperately wanted to see the woman's sword and ask hundreds of questions as she seen the craftsmanship in the work, but she saw the way the woman was. She reminded her of Neji and would almost immediately shoot down any attempt to study her sword. It made her pout. Eventually the two walk back out where Naruto was playing with a device in his hand, his Denraishinki. When he heard the door open he closed it and put it back into his pocket as he walks back over to the counter where Ten took her position as she began to write things down on a sheet of paper. The clothing will be done in a couple days. You can go ahead and pay for it all now or pay on completion. Ten says as Soifin took her position by her master's side once more as she watches as he pays for it all in advance as she nods in thanks. Hey, you should tell me how you both met. I asked her but she's more tight-lipped than Neji, she asked as all Naruto did was turn as they walked out. Have a good one Ten, was all he says giving her a wave as he walks out as Ten huffs at this. Though she knew a few people that would be interested in this. Hinata being one of them. She mentally winced as she wondered how she was going to take this and rubs the back of her head. Oh well, I'll deal with it when the time comes. Outside. Where to now Naruto-sama? He motioned for her to follow him and she did without question as they continued to get a few stares from the civilians but otherwise they were left to their own devices it seemed and that suited him simply fine. He did not care what the civilians thought as long as he had the love and admiration of his loved ones. Well, head over to Ba-chan and get her to sign you in and depending what's going on then possibly have you join in on missions. You remember your Kido? He asks her as she nods as he nodded in satisfaction at this as well. Good, we can pass them off as sign less jutsu. He says making a note to tell her everything she needed to about this world. She nodded as she continued to follow him without a word. Your Ba-chan? What is she like? She asks him curiously as he chuckles to himself at the question. The question is where he begins in answering as he rubbed the back of his hair as he thinks of where to begin at this and he supposed that that is where he should start. The beginning as he pauses for a moment. 3 years ago here, we had lost our village leader by the name of Hiruzen Sarutobi. I looked up to him like my grandfather and helped me where he could and I always appreciated him for it, but he was struck down and killed by his student. The council tasked me and my teacher and godfather, Jiraiya, to go out and find someone to replace the old man. And it turns out that the one who I managed to bring back was my godmother. I'll have to tell you about bringing her back another time. That's a whole story in and of itself, he says with a chuckle as they make it to the Hokage tower as he looks up at it after not seeing it for so long before walking in. Come on, Ba-chan would love you, he says to her with a grin. Hokage's office. Tsunade Senju was currently bored out of her damn mind if she was 100% honest. She honestly wouldn't have taken the job if it wasn't her godchild, though as she saw it, he was more of her grandson than godchild at this point and she didn't mind, and it seemed that Naruto didn't either if him calling her Ba-chan meant anything, and she knew it was his sign of affection to her which she appreciated in all honesty. Someone to look out for again. Someone to protect. She sighed as she went back to writing her signatures in the papers as she looked over each and every one. The civilians liked to be sneaky by sneaking clauses into their contracts but of course she looked over each one. Hurry up and take over Brat. I can't exactly do this forever, she thinks to herself before signing off on it before going to the next page. And it seemed that life was listening to her as before long the door to the room flew open and slamming on the other wall as she tensed up before she heard the voice. Ba-chan. Naruto yells out and before he could take another step or say another phrase, a paperweight seemed to fly, courtesy of the Hokage's hand and smacked Naruto right on the forehead, knocking him flat on his back. I told you to stop calling me that brat, she tells him, her hand extended from throwing the paperweight as she huffs. What's with the new clothes brat? Naruto-sama, Soifin calls out as she rushes over to her student and lover's aid which causes Tsunade to stop what she was doing and look over the woman. She was short, dressed for stealth and infiltration and had power rolling off of her in waves. There was one good question rolling through Tsunade's mind at the moment. Who the hell is she? I'm alright Soifin, I've taken worse hits, he says to her as she nods and lets him get up as he rubs the spot where the paperweight had hit him. Good lord Ba-chan, if I didn't know any better I swear you'd been practicing, he says with a grin as the Hokage snorts as she leans her head on her hand. And I wanted to try a new style. I think it works, he says looking down at himself. Well you and Jiraiya did come back a few days ago, so I've been able to use my right hook against him again and send him flying. I wish he would stop peeping, she says in amusement before her eyes wandered over to Soifin. Who's this brat? She asks as this causes Soifin's eyes to twitch at being called a brat. She wanted to throttle the woman but stopped when Naruto put a hand on her head to calm her down, knowing what little tics she had. When I was training with Pervy Sage, we stopped by Iron Country and I met her, he began to explain as Soifin took note of the story so that she could recite it later if need be as she looks up at him. Her family are notorious in their training of assassins and infiltration experts. The Fawn family. We had stayed a week or so in Iron and we spoke and hit it off. He explains to Tsunade, who nods. Well, I'm glad you're making friends, Brad, but why is she here? Tsunade asks as she leans back in her chair. She didn't trust the newcomer at all, but if Naruto was vouching for her, then at the least she can do was give her the benefit of the doubt. She trusted Naruto's guts, so if she was friendly, then at the very least she can give her a chance. Well, you see, Ba-chan, I had told her I was coming back and she told me that she would meet me here. She arrived last night, he explains as she nods before looking at the black-haired woman. State your full name and your intention of being here, Tsunade ordered as she watched as Soifin kneeled and looked down at the floor to answer the clear superior. My name is Soifin of the Fawn family, I have come to help and protect Naruto-sama. She explains as this only brings up more questions than answers for Tsunade as she kept her composure and looks at her with a nod. You are calling him Naruto-sama, why? Tsunade asks the woman as Naruto watches on. He knew that she could handle it as one of the many good things that he had taught her was, as a shinobi you had to learn how to lie and sell it well. My family is primarily made up of shinobi who guard we consider friends of the family or simply friends. I had yet to be assigned a master, so I had requested from my clan head that I be assigned to Naruto-sama. He agreed, though with Naruto-sama being on a training trip I had to wait until he was finished with his training trip before I was able to take up his role as protector. She explains as Tsunade nods. Naruto mentally smiled, she was really good. What better way to lie than to sprinkle a few kernels of truth to it so you didn't give any indication that they were lying. Good lord, he taught her a little too well. And I'm assuming you want to be assigned to Naruto's shinobi squad, right? She asks, which causes Soifin to nod before Tsunade looks at Naruto at this and raises an eyebrow. You know her best, brat. How skilled do you think she is? She asks. He mentally chuckled. She was my lieutenant for a reason for so many years, though Ba-chan doesn't need to know that. She's about my level, if a little bit lower. She had been trained, from what I was told, since she was 6 or so. She received dedicated training. He explained as Tsunade nods, looking down at the kneeling woman before Tsunade opens the drawer and pulls out a headband. Normally I would never do this as you would have to go through an intense process, especially if you're as strong as Gaki says you are, but I'm willing to throw you a bone here, Soifin. Behave and show me that you're worthy of your headband and you can stay. She says as Soifin looks up and takes the headband. I won't let you down, Tsunade-sama. Soifin says as Tsunade smirks a bit wider at this. It's not me you have to worry about letting down. It's the Gaki here, as he stuck his neck out for you. If it was up to me you'd be under Inoichi's care before you can start the process. But since the Gaki vouched for you, he'll be willing to give you a chance. Do you understand? She explains and nods. Good, good. Before I let you both go, remember Gaki, the training is tomorrow at 9 in the morning with Kakashi, you and Sakura, and now Soifin. If you show up late I swear to God I'm going to stick you on D-rank missions for a month. She says, pointing at Naruto, who raises his hands to placate her. This test will be the chance to prove your skill to not only your peers Soifin but your sensei as well. Understood? She asks as Soifin nods. Good, not get the hell out of here before I throw you both out. Damn it, where's my sake? She mumbles as they both leave the office once more. Making their way down the stairs, Soifin finally spoke up. I see what you had meant. She reminds me a lot of Toshiro's lieutenant, Rangaku, she says as Naruto nods and snickers lightly. Yeah, she drinks and gambles when she doesn't work, and she's usually very outgoing, but well, this job no doubt puts her in an irate mood, Sue. He says with a chuckle as they finally make their way out of the office and looks up at the sky. Still about noon, which meant that it was time to eat. Come on, let's go buy some lunch and we can head home and train for the day. He explains as she nods as they made their way back into the village. It was nice and busy at this point as they stop at a nice little barbecue joint, Choji's family if he recalls correctly as he walks up to it. It was a buffet. Table for 2 please. Truthfully, he wanted to go out to get some ramen, but he wanted her to meet the Ichirakus after the match tomorrow. More memorable and in a potentially better mood. This way, the waitress says as she takes the money for the two of them before leading them over to one of the few empty tables. They both had a seat and thanked the waitress, before they went to go grab their plates at the buffet before having a seat once more as they began to enjoy their meal in silence as she smiles, reaching over and taking her lover's hand. She didn't care if anyone saw what they thought. "Hello to you too," Naruto says, squeezing her hand as he then retracts his hands when he saw his friends walk in, his old friends. Syen of course understood as she watched her friends as she continued to eat before they heard the one with the markings on his cheek spotted them and made his way over. "Yo Naruto, we heard you just got back from training with Jiraiya-sama, how'd it go? And who's this cutie?" he asked as he looked over at Syen, who quietly ignored him as she continued with her food, not wanting to dignify the man with a response if that is how he spoke to them. She knew a few hot heads like this, Renji being one of them, so she decided to do what she did best and simply be quiet and act accordingly. "Yeah, we got back yesterday. Was so exhausted from running so much that when I got home I went to sleep rather quickly. This is Syen, she's from Iron Country and is basically me and Sakura's newest squad member for Team 7 Inches," he explains. He watches as the others, Neji, Shino, Ino, and Shika walk up to them as well. "She single?" Kiba asks as he leans into Syen's personal space before she put his hand to his face and pushed hard and shoved him to the floor without looking up from her food. "No," was all she said as she continued to eat as Naruto too ate his food. "We just got back from Ba-chan's office and registered B-chan here," he says, which causes Syen to blush lightly but fight it down. If it was anyone else to the rookies, they would have immediately thought they were dating, but it was Naruto. He gave nicknames to anyone and everyone, so it was just more as an affectionate moniker to them. "She looks more like a samurai than a ninja, ya no," Ino says, looking over the woman's attire, whose eyes was twitching at the moment as Naruto scoots over and lets the rest of them have a seat, watching Kiba sit as far away from Syen as possible, causing the woman's lip to twitch upward at this as she simply consumed her food. "Don't underestimate her just because she was trained in Iron Country. She can keep up with me and some of her jutsu are top tier. She can give me a run for my money if she were to use one special ability of hers," as Syen snorted. "That is not true and you know it. My Bankai is there merely for power," she says as she picks up another piece of food off her plate before continuing to eat. "Bankai?" Shikamaru asks, which causes Naruto to wave it off as something they'll have to explain to them at another time as he continued to eat with a soft hum. He always did love barbecue, though he couldn't get it often in the Soul Society. God, they were so behind the times. "So are you guys like, together?" asks Ino, which causes Shika to groan. Ever the gossip hound this one, and he hated that about her, but that's what also endeared her to him. She was one of his closest friends after all. "We'll let you draw your own conclusions on that, Ino," Naruto said cryptically as he goes, "You know what?" throws caution to the wind, and turns Syen's head and pulls her into a heated kiss, which causes those at the table to stop and stare at the two as Syen was blushing up a storm by now, her body tensing initially before she relaxed into the kiss before pressing her lips further into his as she moans lightly. Naruto, smirking, pressed his tongue into her mouth as their simple little chaste kiss turned into a full-blown makeout session as Syen puts her free hand on his leg as she leans into the kiss, their tongues battling for dominance, breath against one another. Syen normally wasn't one for public displays of affection, but she was willing to let it go this one time. And the next. And the next. If it was what Naruto wanted, she gave her heart to him and he returned his to her. She was willing to go to the ends of the earth for him as she was sure that he would do the same to her. Reactions around the table were mixed as they watched the hot and heavy makeout session, as it was almost a bit lewd in some of their eyes. Kiba had a grin on his face as he watched on. Sure, she was cute, but he had a front row seat to a good show in his eyes. Ino was smiling like a mad girl. She had the gossip to spread. Don't get her wrong, she was surprised as anyone that Naruto of all people was making out with a girl, but she couldn't be happier. She wanted all her friends to be happy in relationships. Neji's eyes were wide for a good half a second before smiling. She seemed to make Naruto happy, and that's what's all that mattered. Shino was, well, Shino. And Shika, well, troublesome blonde. Which resulted in him getting a smack to the back of the head by Ino. Eventually the two pulled free from the kiss, a trail of spit connecting them, a blush still evident on Syen's face, and a large goofy grin evident on Naruto's. That answer your question, Ino? asked Naruto, which caused Ino to nod as this released any restraint Soifin had as she now took her lover's hand once more. When did this start? Also congratulations. Neji asks curiously as in the corner of his eye he watched as Kiba tried to sneak over and steal a piece of food of Soifin's plate only to be met with a fork right in the hand, quite hard, leaving a loud clang as his hand smacked the table. Youch! Kiba yelled as he yanked the fork free as he rubbed his now sore hand. It bleeding a bit, but that will heal rather quickly. You deserved that, Naruto says with a small smirk. Happened yesterday funnily enough, he says as he checks the time and eyes widen. Sorry guys, but I forgot I had to do something, he says, throwing some money on the table for a tip before standing and holding Soifin's hand and began to lead her out the restaurant. What did you forget, Naruto-sama? She asked as she rushed out the store with him as they began to rush towards the Hokage tower once more. I wanted to ask Ba-chan regarding something about my parents, but given we were completely preoccupied with you and the whole time travel thing, it completely slipped my, he said before the corner of his eye caught something as he then wasn't paying any attention to where he was going as his eyes looked at what caught his attention, which caused him to slam forehead first into a sideways pole meant for hanging clothes, causing a loud clang as he smacked into the ground and rubbed his head. Ow, Naruto-sama, he groans out as he recovers and looks at the name of the shop. Urahara's Candy Shop. Naruto groans as he rubs his head as he grumbles, looking at Soifin, who is currently helping him off the ground as he stands, shakes his head. He was expecting the Shinigami King to send more help his way eventually, but never this damn quickly as he looks at Soifin, who, seeing her teacher was alright, then turns her head to see what it was that caught his attention and her eyes widen before looking back at Naruto. Is that who I think it is, Naruto-sama? She asks curiously as he rubs the back of his head as he already had a good idea. I think so, but we'll have to see. Come on, let's go see if it's hats and clogs, was all he said as he lead her inside, and it was of course, much like the old store back in Karakura town, and sitting at the back with a grin, his signature hat and clogs, was Kazuki Urahara, his face hidden behind his signature fan, his other hand holding his Zanpakuto. It's good to see you again, he says as Naruto gave him a deadpan look as he heard the distinct sound of purring as he watched as a cat moved from behind one of the counters, a black cat, and moved to him before pressing its face against him as Naruto looks down. And he already knew who it was as he snorts. It's good to see you too, hats and clogs, and I don't think B-chan is appreciating you pressing yourself against me, Yoruichi, he says, and as predicted, Soifin's eyes was twitching but made no move against the black cat, Yoruichi, before stepping away and moving to the rooms in the back to no doubt get dressed, as she was at the very least very respectful of someone's relationship, even if she did enjoy the occasional teasing. I'm sure you have plenty of questions, take a seat and I'll have Tessai bring us some tea, he says as the two nod as they make their way over to one of the kneeling tables as they got comfortable as the hulk of a man did eventually bring the tea and setting it down for them to drink as Naruto picks up the tea a second after it was poured while Soifin didn't bother just yet, her eyes glued to the former captain of the Soul Society. Come on, drink, it's not going to kill you, Urahara says as he picks up his own tea and takes a sip of it as he sighs in content. I just got here this morning, Kazuki, when did you get here? Naruto asks as he sets the tea back down as Kazuki sets down his own tea in turn as he hums in thought. I've been here for about, a month now. I had to set up the shop for you guys, he had let me know what he was planning. He had called me just after you had left and told me to help you however I could, and well, here I am, he chuckles. Flashback. The Shinigami King watches as the two steps through the portal as his mind was working overtime as he sighs to himself. He personally didn't want to intervene too much as that would undermine the free will that his sister had given the mortals of the realms, but knew for everything to remain balanced that he had to do just that and intervene and eventually stop Aizen. And if that meant interfering so much, then so be it. As he looks down at the list of those he was debating on sending, as a few names stood out as he smiled. One of his favorite Shinigami was on the list, Kazuki Urahara. Taking the kodachi on his waist once more, he took yet another swipe before the portal opens, and a second or two later, drops the candy shop owner, hat and clogs and all. Kazuki Urahara, it is a pleasure to meet you at last, the king calls out as he slips the kodachi back into his waist and looks at him. Well, hello to you too, though it seems you know who I am but not the other way around, though I can say I have a pretty good guess as to who you are, Kazuki said as he stood and wipes off his clothes from any imaginary dust and chuckles. I'm sure you already have an idea, though I'll humor you Kazuki Urahara. You may know me as the Shinigami King. And I have a task for you. He says as Kazuki looses his smirk as his mind was already knowing why he had called him here. The situation with Aizen had gone past the point of no return, so they had to do something. And that terrified the Soul Reaper because he always assumed that they could stop Aizen. He liked to err on the side of optimism. What do you need me to do? He asks the Shinigami King as he closes his fan, standing more straighter as he grabs his Zanpakuto and looks at the deity much more directly now as he could tell how serious the situation was. I've already sent 2 back in time to begin the process of setting the time back to where it needs to be. I will need to send you there to assist him as well. He will be the focal point of this, but that does not mean that you cannot assist in your own ways. He explains as Kazuki nods as he sighs softly before giving the deity a small smirk. Of course, but I want my friends from the shop. He explains as the Shinigami King look at Kazuki for a moment as if contemplating before the deity laughs loudly. This is why I like you Kazuki. Very well, I will explain the situation to them and send them your way as well. I will send you a month or so before I send Uzumaki, so that you may prepare whatever you need to do. He says as Kazuki nods as the death god grabs his Kodachi once more and with one swift swipe once more, opens a portal for the Shinigami. We'll set things right this time, Kazuki says with a grin as he gave a wave and walks through the portal and left to go do what he did best. Open up a candy shop. Flashback end. So he sent you here to help in however he can, huh? Naruto says with a chuckle as he rubs the back of his head. He knew things were bad but didn't realize they were bad that he needed backup. But at the same time he knew the gods had to play it safe when it came to things like this, so he simply nodded. Thanks Hats and Clogs, we couldn't do it without you. He thanked the man as Yoruichi walks back out in her usual clothing and has a seat next to her longtime friend. So what's your plan? You remember these events best? Yoruichi asks him as he strokes his chin in thought as he knew what was coming at the very least, so he had a bit of an advantage. We have the training with my old teacher Kakashi tomorrow morning, me, Soifun and an old friend Sakura. We'll have to go through that, but then after that is when a friend of mine is kidnapped. We'll be facing off against our first 2 Akatsuki. I'll fill you in on them as they'll be coming after me. He explains as he hums in thought. Over my dead body, Soifun says with a huff as she finally takes a sip of her tea and looks down at it with a raised eyebrow. It's black tea, explained Tessai. Coming after you? Why? Urahara asks as he looks at the captain, who then pulls his Zanpakuto and lays it across his lap and pats it. Originally when I was alive I was the container for a demon. Which caused me a lot of trouble when I was first growing up, but now that I've saved the village from another demon, a lot of the civilians have come around. He explains before Soifun looks at her lover curiously. Then what about the one that threw the brick at you? Soifun asked as she sets the tea back down on the table as he chuckled and rubs the back of his head. Well, you still get the stragglers from time to time, he explains. There's a select few who can't get past their own prejudices to see me for the person that I am. Regardless, those people I don't care for, he explains with a shrug. Anyway, after Gara we'll have to finish off the Akatsuki, however long that takes, and begin training. Just because we're back in time does not mean that we can be complacent. He says as Soifun and Yoruichi nods. And here I was just hoping to be a simple shop owner again. But I get the idea, he says with a small smile, showing that he wasn't serious. I noticed we aren't all using Gigai, so this means we're using actual bodies. He explains as the others nod, already coming to that conclusion. Alright guys, me and Soifun have to get going. Originally I was going to meet Ba-chan again about something, but it'll have to wait as we have a test in the morning. He says as the others nod as Tessai takes the plates to wash. Don't be a stranger, Kazuki says as he waves as he watches as Naruto and Soifun leave as he sighs to himself. Yeah, I'm sure we'll be fine, he says with a chuckle then a smile. Yeah, you're probably worrying too much again, she says patting her friend's back. Naruto's apartment. Naruto groans as he removes his haori as it drops to the ground before he faceplanted into his bed. Sure, he hadn't done any training or the like, but today was extremely exhausting as he rolls over and looks up at the ceiling. He had a lot of things to plan for and a lot of things to work with to make sure that things go smooth this time. There might not be another chance, and he was not willing to risk it. Not this time, especially now that he knew all that he knew. He ran a hand through his hair as he sighs softly. He had a lot to worry about. Then he thought about Sasuke too. He wanted to bring him back, but this was a lot bigger than one man. If he had to, he'll do what he had to. And that's not something he wanted to think about. It wasn't a second later when the face of his lover filled his vision with a smile on her face before he felt her body press against his as she leans down and plants a small kiss on his lips lightly as he smiled and returned the kiss and rubs her back. "Hello to you too," he tells her as he enjoyed the weight of her on his body. "You're thinking too much, come on. Calm down. Let's get some sleep for the test tomorrow," she says as he nods. And it wasn't long before the realm of Morpheus took them. Next day, training ground. Naruto and Syen were currently sitting in the lotus position across from one another as their breathing was nice and even. In, out, as their Ritsu reached out and mixed with one another, a holding of their hands, mixing their souls. An intimate act, as they waited for their teammate and teacher. It was a nice and sunny day. Naruto was now in his old black and orange suit, but the only difference now was that he wore his captain's haori above his clothing and his zanpakuto tied to his waist. It wasn't too much longer before he felt the first one arrives, and it would be Sakura, his old teammate as he opened his eyes, their Ritsu no longer mixing as they pulled it back into their body. "Hey Naruto, glad to see you didn't pick up Kakashi's sense of time," she says with a grin as she watched as Naruto stood as he laughed at the comment and rubbed the back of his head. "Come on Sakura, give me some credit here alright?" he says with a grin as Syen stood and walked over to them as well as Sakura extended her hand. "It's good to meet you Syen, Tsunade-sama let me know of your addition," she says as Syen nods and takes her hand and shakes it as Syen seemed to be sizing her up. "It's a pleasure," she said simply. Sakura had been told from Tsunade about their new squamate which caused some questions but she of course went along with her master's orders and went along with it. It was a few minutes later before Tsunade, Shizune and Jiraiya arrived to watch the fight as Naruto groans knowing that the old lecher of a godfather would be perving on his now girlfriend as he rubs his head as they wait for his teacher. "What are your skills if I may ask Syen-san?" Sakura asks her as she waits patiently, as Syen had her eyes closed and didn't want to answer but a tap on the elbow from Naruto basically let her know to be nice since they were going to work together and that meant that she had to at the very least know of any skills that she had. She looked at Naruto for a moment before nodding. "I've learned a great deal of Kido techniques from my training with my family, as well as how to use my family's bloodline," she says as she pats her sword and leaving it be as this caused Sakura to tilt her head in curiosity. "What are Kido Syen-san?" she asks as she puts her hands on her hips and looks around as if expecting Kakashi to finally show up. "It's a type of jutsu focused purely on the spiritual side of chakra," she explains as she was glad that her and Naruto had gone over this before they had left the house knowing that it would be brought up. "Oh that's cool. I heard you're from Iron Country right? Did they teach you that there?" she asks as Syen shook her head. "No my family taught it to me," she states as finally, Kakashi appeared in a swirl of leaves at the training ground by the river. "It's nice to see you guys showed up. And here I was hoping you didn't and I could have the day off you know," he says with a smile from behind his mask as he takes a step to them. He too had been briefed by Tsunade about their newest arrival. That just means he'll just have to make a formal introduction later. "Unlike you Kakashi, we're never late," Naruto says with a grin as he slips his captain's haori on tighter as Syen nods as she moves away from Naruto and Sakura a bit in case the teacher decided to be cheeky and attack them right off the bat, but staying close enough to intercept any attack that he launched at them. Ma of course. "Now, I'm sure you both remember this test," he says as he holds up a single, solitary bell as he jingles it a few times just for added effect as he smiles beneath his mask. "But since we have a newcomer, the goal of this test is to get the bell by the end of the time limit. Come at me with the intent to kill, or you will fail," he says looking at the three of them before he ties the bell to his waist and walks over to the timer and clicks it. "You're going down," Naruto said before the three scattered into the woods as Kakashi chuckles as he moves near the water as he pulls out his book. He was confident he knew Naruto and Sakura's skills, but it's the newcomer he knew that he had to watch out for. She seemed to be capable of quite a bit from what he had heard her speak of herself but the fact of the matter is that he didn't know a damn thing and how to counter her moves so at the moment all he did was wait patiently as he looks around, waiting for the others to strike at him, his eyes lazily looking into his book. It wasn't long before he got his answer as Soifin was the first to act, with a flash of speed, rushed him with what looked to be a gauntlet on her finger as she poised to strike him. Not wanting to take any chances, he pulled a kunai and deflected it, before kicking her away, which then caused Naruto to join the fray, he holding his own sword in hand, as he too, with the same speed strikes at him, again, only for the more experienced teacher to deflect, his eyes moving back to Soifin who had recovered from the kick and rushed him once more. They were keeping him busy for the longest time as Sakura waited for the perfect opportunity as she then got it as Naruto managed to land a kick on him which threw him into the ground below as she tightens her glove and smirks. "Naruto! Soifin! Jump!" she yelled as she jumps from the bushes as her chakra encased her first and aims it right at Kakashi. "Don't give up now, sensei!" she yells as he fist slams into the ground as it caved and crumbled, throwing large pieces of land into the air, which Sakura tisked as she saw that all she managed to hit was a wooden log rather than her sensei. "He's fast, I'll give him that," Soifin says as she tightens Suzembachi on her hand. "Yeah, that just means we have to be faster," he says as he watches as a water dragon sprouts up from behind them as he grabs Soifin and jumps out of the way. Normally, Soifin would love the position she was in, pressed up against her lover's chest as she listened to his heartbeat, but this was one of those times that she knew she had to focus. Though it was nice to listen to even if it was for a few moments. As Naruto skids to a stop, he lets her down as Kakashi jumps from wherever he was hiding, lightning Inka's hand as he rushed Soifin, intending to strike her. Naruto was about to intervene before Soifin moved first and grabs his hand and strikes Suzembachi into his abdomen before he reacted and kicked her away as he took a few steps back as he looks down at the mark on his clothing but felt it bind to his skin as well as he looks at her in curiosity. My family are known as Soul Reapers. Each of us having a different Zanpakuto. This one is mine, Suzembachi, she says motioning to the gold and black gauntlet on her wrist. It had taken me months to master, she says remembering the lie that she was told to tell and she told it perfectly. 2 strikes with this in the same area, and your body disintegrates, she explains with a smirk as this causes his eyes to widen. You told us to come at you with the intent to kill, and here I am doing just that. Prepare yourself, Kakashi Hatake, she yells as she rushed him again. With Tsunade and Co. That is a really dangerous ability, Tsunade-sama, Shizune said as she had listened to what Soifin had to say about her ability and it terrified her as all it took was 2 strikes to end a fight. I don't remember meeting this girl in Iron Country, Jiraiya says as she watched the fight before his grin turned lecherous. Trust me, I would have remembered a cutie like her. He began before he was punched straight out of the tree and into the trunk of another as Tsunade huffs and watches the fight. And this is exactly why the Gaki didn't introduce you. He knew you would be perving on her, she says as she watched the fight on in interest. She wondered what the girl can do and at the moment she showed that she can keep up with Kakashi even before he began going all out. Back with the fight. Then that means I'll have to go all out, he says closing his eyes for a moment before raising his headband to reveal his infamous Sharingan as he watched as Soifin charged him again, seeming fully intent on landing that second strike as he began to backpedal. Holding a kunai, he defended any strike that he could as to not hit again as Naruto was following close behind, waiting for his time to strike as he noticed that this was getting them absolutely nowhere as Kakashi was just too fast for her to attempt another strike, though he knew that she would stop before she made contact and end the match then and there. Rasengan, he yells as he used the chakra sphere which Kakashi grabs his wrist and throws him into the water before using his kunai to block yet another strike from Soifin before he kicked her away and jumps back to gain some distance. Naruto grimaced and saw that this was getting them nowhere as he climbed out the water. Soifin, Maneuver 11, Sakura back us up, Naruto yelled, showing Soifin exactly why he was captain as Naruto began to match her speed. Kakashi speeding up as to not be caught as Naruto pulled out a strand of ninja wire and throws it at her, for her to catch. This caused Sakura, who had been following close behind as Naruto stops dead in his tracks. Increasing her speed, and overpassing Kakashi and managing to tie the wire around his waist as he then almost panicked as he grabbed a kunai to get himself free. But he wasn't quick enough as with one hard and quick yank, pulled Kakashi towards them. Sakura, right. She immediately saw what they were doing as she watched as Kakashi was yanked back as her hand glowed once more and rears her hand back. Wait. Kakashi yells out as he saw the fist coming straight for him and he remembered the punches from Tsunade, and they fucking hurt. He closed his eyes waiting for the pain, but oddly enough it never came, before he peeks his eyes open and, there. Sakura was holding a bell with a grin as she jingles it a few times just like he did at the start of this training session. Does that mean we win? She asks as he stares at his 3 students incredulously as he nods, pulling himself off the ground as he uses a kunai to cut himself free from the ninja wire. Yes, you all did well, he says with his smile once more behind his mask. I'm going to be sore tomorrow, but I think it was worth it. He says to them as Soifun huffs lightly at this as Naruto chuckles and walks over and rubs her hair lightly. You did a good job, B-chan, he says with a grin. Of course Sakura heard that Naruto was dating by now, so this was no surprise really, but that just meant that she had to get all the juicy details from them later, which she had no problem with since they were no doubt going to be going out to celebrate. Good job you 3. I knew you would all do a good job. Now why don't you guys get rested and the like, and I'll have a job for you guys tomorrow. Tsunade says as they all nod and began to walk towards the village. Soifun she says softly as she looks at the back of the retreating woman. She had so many questions about her and not enough answers. And it bugged the hell out of her. But she trusted the Gaki, and if that meant putting her doubts down, then so be it. Just means that if she hurt Naruto, then that means she will get the honor of turning her insides to paste. Shinigami's court. You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you? He asked the woman who was lying on the floor bleeding in front of him. Her mocha skin and green eyes peering up at him as he stood over her. And what stood out at the moment the most was that she was bleeding, almost profusely. The woman at the moment who was lying bleeding was Tyr Harabel. Espada number 3 of Las Noches. Who cough are you? She asked as she let out a bit of blood from her mouth, her eyes lifeless as she looks at what she could only assume was the Shinigami King. She wasn't stupid, she knew what Aizen had wanted to do, and now here she was, standing, or rather, bleeding in front of him. What do you want? What I want is to fix the mistakes your master is making. Though I suppose he's no longer your master, is he? He cut you down and threw you away like nothing more than garbage. He says as she glares at him before she coughed again another glob of blood. She continued to bleed and he knew he had to fix that as he sighed and waved his hand and removed any and all wounds from her as the blade strikes healed. It wasn't too much longer before she rubbed the spots where her wounds would have been and looks up at him as she eventually managed to stand up. Why have you called me here then? She asks him as she powered down to her first form, fixing her clothing as she knew she had absolutely no chance in taking down the Shinigami King, and if he wanted to kill her then he would have done so already. No, he wanted something different. I am going to offer you a second chance, Tyr Harabel. I am normally not as generous with chances as I am, but Kami has asked me to assist you with one, and if she is asking then she must see some important role that you will be playing, he tells her as he then narrowed his eyes at her as he takes a step to her. However, do not take my sister's kindness for my own. I am righting the wrongs your master has made, and if you do anything to jeopardize this then I will take your soul and stick it where I keep all other damned souls, he says as he then points to his stomach. Do you understand? I understand, Shinigami-sama, she says bowing her head before she pauses and looks back up at him. Before you tell me what task I will be doing, can you tell me what became of my fracciones? She asked as he looks at her. With my sister. She may or may not send them to you at a later time. For now, it'll be you by yourself. He explains as she nods as he then looks at her. I will be sending you with the Soul Reapers I had sent to the past to right all the wrongs. You are to help them in any way. Am I understood? He asks as she nods. Good, he says as he takes the Kodachi on his waist and creates another portal. Be gone with you. At the moment, Naruto was currently standing with the rest of his team in the Hokage's office as they were currently receiving their briefing. Naruto knew what was coming and had already been prepared as he ran his hand through his hair as he was stressing lightly. He knew what was going to happen and wondered if he could save Gaara before Chio had to give up her life, or will it be the same as last time? Gaara saved, and 2 Akatsuki, 1 dead and 1 getting away. You are to rescue the case cage at all costs, do you understand? Tsunade says as she had her hands interlinked in front of her as she looks at the entirety of Team 7. Yes, Hokage-sama. They called out as she nods in contentment. She knew they wouldn't let her down as she looks out the window. She had a bad feeling about this, and not just about the kidnapping as she turns back to them. Dismissed, leave as soon as you are ready. I will accept no less than success, she says as she watched them salute before they all walked out the door as Tsunade hums softly in thought before she pulls out a scratcher from one of her desks and scratches at it. After a few moments she stared at it. Fuck. With Team 7, 1 hour later. After packing and making sure they had everything they needed for the trip they had departed, all of them rushing towards Suna. And of course with Temari as well given that she was visiting Konoha at the time as an ambassador. Naruto and the others jumped from branch to branch as they were currently making their way. Temari would constantly look at Soifin who was close by to Naruto as her eyes stayed dead ahead. She was wondering who exactly this was and why she was so close to him. She had come to develop a brotherly bond through Gaara with Naruto and that meant that she looked after his heart as well as she caught up to the lieutenant. Your name is Soifin, right? She asks curiously as this causes Soifin to look at her with a raised eyebrow, wondering where exactly she was going with this as she focused on making sure they continued to where they were going. I am, Temari, right? She asks curiously as she nodded in return at this as they continued, Sakura and Kakashi listening in as Naruto let her be, seeing as he trusted her to handle any issue they had. His mind focused on Gaara and the Akatsuki as he wondered how he would do this, his eyes wandering to his Zanpakuto that hung from his waist. Yeah, that's me, she said simply as she jumped from branch to branch, her eyes not leaving the woman for a moment as she smirks lightly. So, you're dating Naruto, so I hear. You better be taking care of him, she says as Soifin looks at her more fully now. Of course, I am. Who are you to him to say such a thing? She asks with a bit more hostility now as she would not have her relationship questioned and threatened by a random woman. She was completely secure in their relationship and she didn't need to be told things such as that as Temari's eyes hardened and looks at the woman as she stops, causing the others to as well as she walks over to Soifin, and grabbing her by her clothing and lifting her, which wasn't hard given her petite nature. Naruto saved my brother, helped him, I'll be damned if some random floozy woman breaks his heart. Do you understand me? She asks as she looks at her dead in the eyes. That guy right there is a brother to me. So if you hurt him, I will bury you, Temari threatens. Crystal, Soifin says, normally she wouldn't let someone grab her in such a manner but knew she had to be on her best behavior as she was no doubt being watched by the village and that anything she does will no doubt reflect on Naruto. Which is one thing she didn't want. Temari, satisfied, drops her back onto her defeat. Glad we have an understanding. Let's keep going, she says as they keep going towards the village. Temari and Soifin exchanging glares occasionally as Sakura catches up to Naruto who had been leading the entire time. Why didn't you stop that, Naruto? She asks curiously as she had wanted to intervene and stop it but Naruto had grabbed her shoulder to prevent her from doing such, and Kakashi, seeing that had understood not to interrupt and watch that play out. Soifin is from the Fawn family, he began as he looks at Sakura before looking back ahead and hums to himself. In the Fawn family they are taught that they are to protect their lord at the cost of their own lives, and of course since she is duty-bound to me, not only via family but heart-wise, if I were to step in, then that would show her but her family as well that she can't do her job correctly, that her lord has to interfere. He explains as Sakura nods at this. Not only that but she is a grown woman as well who can handle her own battles, even if the battle is about me. She says as this causes Sakura to nod in satisfaction. I see. Thank you, Naruto, I didn't think of it like that, she says as they continued to their destination now in silence as there was really nothing much else to discuss at the time. Their eyes locked dead ahead in determination, resolved to do what they needed to do. Sanagakure. Gaara was panting as he faced Deidara, one of the Akatsuki members as he was absolutely exhausted at this point, having used everything in his power to defend the village as he could barely keep his stand up as he had done everything he could. I'll protect this village, he mumbles out as he could barely stand before Deidara laughs. Don't go dying on me yet, we need you alive, he says dropping to the ceiling that Gaara was currently standing on as he walks over and grabs the cage and throws him onto his bird. Gaara didn't have much strength to stay awake much longer but he did catch sight of someone standing at the other end of the roof before he heard her speak. I don't think so, and a moment after that, the Jinchuriki passed out atop the bird as Deidara turns to face the newcomer. And who are you, Me, I'm your executioner, Otogakure. Orochimaru was, he considered, to be a very intelligent man. He had done things that many considered to be impossible and done things that would have him be remembered should his plan fail and he passes on. Which he didn't see as likely given his abilities. He chuckles to himself as he was currently looking at his current experiment with contentment. It had been a success, even if Kabuto didn't think so. Orochimaru-sama? What do you see in that corpse? Kabuto asks his master as Orochimaru studied the body that laid across from him. Kabuto saw just that, a mangled corpse, but his master saw something that clearly, he couldn't as he chuckles to him. I see a lot of things, Kabuto-kun. For the moment however, I got what I needed, do me a favor and burn the corpse. I don't want any loose ends, I got what I needed out of it, he says as Kabuto nods and goes to do just that as Orochimaru headed back to the main hall of his base as his mind was lost in thought at the moment of how to use his new discovery. Are you going to continue training me or not? He heard Sasuke ask him as he nods. Yes. Let's begin, Sasuke-kun. He says with a grin as it wouldn't be too much longer before he was strong enough to take over his body. He couldn't wait for that day. En route to Suna, Team 7 and the rest had stopped for the night as they had set up a small campfire as well as a few tents. They had hit the halfway point as they were almost there. Naruto was currently sitting at the campfire as he watched as the fire cooked the meat that they were currently cooking. So I have to ask Soifun-san, Sakura says as she too sat at the campfire as she looks at the woman who was currently seated next to her lover as their hands intertwined. Soifun raising a brow at this, showing that she was paying attention to the pink-haired woman. About your ability, with the gauntlet, she asks. Does it really take only 2 strikes to kill a person? She asks. It does, but there is a caveat to it. It's based on my spiritual energy. My spiritual energy from both strikes has to overcome the other's spiritual energy in order for them to disintegrate. For example, since my spiritual energy is higher than Kakashi's, it would have certainly killed him, but if I tried it on Naruto-sama here, he can overpower my Shikai, and not cause it to disintegrate him. She explains and he nods as he understood how her power worked from how Urahara had explained it. So I just can't let you get close and you'd never be able to kill me? Tamari asks as Soifun, still annoyed with the woman but being respectful, only nods at this. Though with my training under the Fawn family, it helped me overcome these weaknesses, so don't believe you and your fan can keep me away forever. She says as Naruto, having enough, reaches and pinches her cheeks and pulls. Behave, B-chan. He tells her with a smile as she huffs and nods as he, with a grin, pulls her onto his lap as she eeped at the sudden display of affection before eventually relaxing into her lover's arms and leans her back against his chest and purrs lightly. Well, aren't you two a happy couple? Come on, we have to get to bed and wake early. Sakura, you have first watch, 3 hours then wake someone, Kakashi said as she nods as the others put out the fire before they began to turn in for the night. And of course, each had their own tents, though Naruto and Soifun shared a tent. Use protection, you two, was all Kakashi said, before a small rock bounced off the back of his head as this causes him to laugh as he climbed into his own tent. The next morning 0600. They were up and early as they rushed towards Suna once more as Tamari led this time as she knew the route by heart as she was ready for almost anything. Naruto of course was expecting the same as last time. Gaara would be having his Biju extracted by now and that they would have to go out and rescue him. How are you holding up? He asks Tamari, who said nothing initially as her mind was going 100 miles an hour at the moment. As well as I can given the circumstances, was all she said as he nodded as they could see the village coming up as he ran his hand through his hair. He at least knew that village, like last time, would be in one piece, he just had to help the others. Eventually, they made it to the front gate, who was greeted by Baki. You guys made it back, he says as they eventually stopped in front of him. What's the situation? She asks her former teacher as he motions for them to follow him. Gaara was defending the village as well as he could last night, but the Akatsuki member was better than anyone had anticipated. It was Deidara of Iwa. He explains as the others nod. So what happened? Tamari asks as they were headed to the hospital at the moment. He would have been taken if someone hadn't intervened. He explains as they eventually stop inside of the hospital when Naruto caught sight of a familiar gray jacket and pauses as his eyes widen, tripping over his own 2 feet. Ah, you're here already, Baki calls out to the woman who turns around as this causes Naruto's eyes to widen further. Kei Karasuba, he calls out as Soifun, who was walking behind him, not seeing the woman, smacks into his back, then hears the name. Wait, what? Hello, my Ashikabi-sama. In Kirigakure. Tear Harabelle sighed as she stood, looking at her hands as she had been given a rundown of what was going down from the Shinigami King and what she had to do. Not to say that she didn't appreciate the knowledge and that she had been given a second chance. No, she didn't like the situation. She was in enemy territory with no information on where she was and what she needed to do as she looks around. Sighing to herself, she decides to take the initiative as she jumps up to the sky and looks around to see if she could find anything, any form of life or anything she could use to get to where she's going. Tyr Harabel despised Aizen by this point, having been talked down to by him, as well as those who sacrificed their lives for him. He saw them as nothing more than expendable soldiers and pawns for him, and that infuriated her. She knew them. She was friends with some of them. Stark and Lilynet had died at the hands of one of the captains. Her fracciones died at the hands of the head captain, and she even held some respect to her other opponent as he understood that she wanted to avenge her comrades but was in opposition to her, telling her sorry that she could not avenge them. And yet, Aizen looked down upon them more than her opponents did. They respected them enough to give them a fair fight and end it quickly. But Aizen spat on their sacrifices. No, this time she had to make sure that Aizen didn't get to the position that he did, and if she had to trust Shinigami, then so be it. She would sacrifice her happiness and her life in honoring the memory of that of her followers and avenge them. Even if has yet to happen. No, this time, things will be different, even if she has to kill Aizen herself. Eventually, her sight caught something as she stretched out with her spirit energy and felt multiple life forms beneath the ground and saw it was a hidden bunker as she eventually made her way over to it. She was confident she can handle whatever it is that they threw at her. She eventually landed and made her way to the entrance as she looks around. She wasn't one for violence, so she decided that she wanted to negotiate first as she knocks on the entrance to it, only to be answered by two ninja. "The hell are you?" they ask her as her eyes twitched at the language. "I am looking for help and seem to be lost. I need help finding Konohagakure." "Oh, so you're Konoha trash then? Don't worry," the man says as he grabs the sword on his back. "You can find it as a damn ghost." He yells as he starts to pull his sword from his sheath only to be cut in half by Harabel, who a bit was just faster with her blade. The other moved to strike her only to be cut down as well a moment later as she sighs. "I didn't want to do this," she says as she takes a step inside the base and began to wander the halls, deeming it not worthy to release her Rishirishin. She kept walking as she cut down anyone who stood in her path as she moved to what she could feel was the prison section. These ninjas, which if she remembered correctly, was Otogakure, as she lobbed yet another head off as it landed to the floor. "To sacrifice yourselves in the name of hate. How shameful," she says as she pulls her blade out of yet another, not even using her bala or seros as it would just be overkill with the average skill of these ninja. "When I get my hands on you, you'll make a nice breeding bitch." One yells out as he attacks her with his own sword only to be bisected at the waist and fall to the floor as she continues her way to the prison. As she stretched out with her spiritual energy, feeling most of the combatants had been taken care of, especially since this seemed to be a small outpost at best and not that many ninja to defend it. She sighs as she slips her sword back into her sheath and makes it to the prison where she could feel two different signatures as she pushes the door into it and looks over the two women that was currently in the room. Both of them redheads as one seemed to be in a recovery bed while the other tended to her. "Perhaps either of you can help me as the others here didn't seem to want to help me," she says to them. "Yeah, and who are you, skank?" called out the woman who was lying on the recovery bed and was smacked by the other woman, which caused the bed-bound woman to grumble and looks away with a small huff. "My name is Tyr Harabel. I am currently on a mission and looking for Konohagakure in my attempts to find Uzumaki Naruto," she says simply and plainly as this causes the one with bite marks to stop and look at the mocha-skinned woman and narrow her eyes at her. "Uzumaki Naruto?" she asks as this causes her to look at her. "Yes, what are your names?" she asked politely as the one standing sighs and puts her hands on her hips. "My name is Karen Uzumaki, and this is Tayuya Uzumaki. I guess it's a pleasure to meet you," she says with a huff. "Fuck no it's not, she killed people to get here," and she would have continued only to be smacked by Karen again and stares at her. She single-handedly took out an entire base on her own, excluding us two because they attacked her, and I could tell she was holding back, so if you want to be hostile to the woman, then by all means and challenge her. Your legs may allow you to walk and run at this point, but by no means are you ready for combat, and I will not be helping you on your suicide mission," Karen explains as Tayuya sighs and realizing she was right as she groans when she sat up from the bed. "Fine, it's good to meet you," she murmurs out as Karen helps her to her feet. Yeah, we can help you. You said the shithead was an Uzumaki, right? She asks as Tear nods at this, her hands crossed over her generous bust, Karen eyeing then jealously but otherwise stayed civil. Yeah, we're Uzumaki too, honestly. We thought most of them died, but if one is living in Konoha then we can head that way. More than likely Orochimaru will write off this base since everyone is dead and we're not important enough for him to track us down. Karen says as Tayuya rubs her mark on her neck. Hey bitch, I don't suppose you know how to remove seals, do you? She asks, causing the woman to shake her head and sighs. Whatever, let's just get ready to go. Let's find a map and leave this hellhole. I don't want to be here any longer than I have to be. Karen nods as she grabs one of the sealing scrolls and unfurls it and began to pack things into it as Tear watches curiously, wondering how sealing works as she watched the woman grab everything from medical supplies to kunai as well as taking what she could off the dead bodies to slip into the scroll as well. So what are you here for then? You get lost or some shit? Tayuya asks her savior, who nods at this as she watched Karen pack things before they grabbed a map. In a sense, I was sent here by Shinigami-sama, though I believe he sent me here by mistake, she says as Karen nods and puts the scroll on her back before helping Tayuya to her feet once more as they began to walk out the base, passing dead body after dead body as Karen held the map. She didn't trust this woman, but she trusted Orochimaru less. She went with the evil she didn't know rather than the evil she did at this point, and if she was telling the truth then that meant she could meet yet another clan member and that was all right in her books. You're fucking shitting me, a god sent you here? Fucking why? She asks as they found the main road and began to walk it as they couldn't run that fast given Tayuya's condition, and this would at the very least let the women get to know one another. So she looked at the two and considered her words carefully. While she knew she could deal with these two if they were a threat at all, she also had to be careful of how she goes about things, otherwise she'll just make things harder for herself. Shinigami-sama believes I would be of better help here than where I was originally, she says as this causes Karen to look at her. If that's true then him sending you here doesn't sound like a mistake. He knew exactly what he was doing. Knowing you would find us and knowing that you would help us since we are Uzumaki. She says as Tear pauses for a moment at this and nods at her words. The girl was right, it seems. But wait a minute, Tayuya says, closing her eyes as she tries to recall what happened 3 years ago before looking at Tear. Is Uzumaki that blonde loudmouth? She asks as Tear looks at her. Yes, I believe he is blonde and is a loudmouth. Why is this so surprising? She asks her curiously as they began to make their way to Kiri, where they could catch a boat to head over to Konoha. I saw him at the Chunin exams 3 years ago and the shithead was on the retrieval team that cost me my legs. Are you damned sure he's an Uzumaki? She asked as this caused Karen to pause and look at the woman. Yes, Shinigami-sama called him Uzumaki Namikaze as his family names. Will that be a problem? She asks as she raises an eyebrow at the two. No. If Shinigami-sama called him that then he is an Uzumaki, it's just that most Uzumaki have red hair and have an affinity to sealing. So you'll have to excuse any skepticism we have regarding Naruto, Miss Haribel. It's alright. Let's get going. The sooner we arrive the sooner you can meet him and judge him for yourself, she says as the two nod as they quickened their pace. Sanagakure. Sakura at the moment was currently doing her best to remove the poison from Kankuro, old lady Chiyo helping her with what needed to be done as well as they made sure that Kankuro would survive, and of course Gaara, as they had already taken the time to heal and look him over. The most he had sustained were some broken bones and some chakra exhaustion, so at the moment he was currently resting and awake, but resting nonetheless as the hospital was under constant surveillance and protection. Not that Sakura could blame them one bit. Gaara was beaten up pretty bad and he was in a vulnerable condition, but at the moment he would recover at the very least, which brought Sakura's mind to the mystery woman that had saved Gaara. Who was she and how the hell did she recognize Naruto and Soifun? The woman wore similar clothes to them and only carried a sword, which was bloody from removing Deidara's head, which was thankfully, was killed before he detonated the vast amount of explosives he had in his chest. She looked over to the two women and Naruto, who was currently speaking under a privacy seal, which she could understand. What are you doing here, Karasuba? Asked Soifun as she had her arms crossed over her chest as the woman grinned like a madman at her. Shinigami-sama deemed you not exactly worthy to make sure things went to plan and sent me to help my Ika. She says as she walks over to Naruto and puts a finger to his chest as she looks up at him and licks her lips. This doesn't faze Naruto as he had been dealing with this for years with her. That's not true and you know it. We're more than enough, and I will not have my position usurped by some bloodthirsty hound. Syen calls out as she removes the woman's hand from her lover's chest and glares at Karasuba, who looked annoyed but then grinned. Then why would he send me? And that hollow bitch? This caused Naruto to pause as he looks at his third in command, his enforcer of the second division. Hollow bitch? This causes Karasuba to nod as she goes back into serious mode as she puts her one hand on her hip. He had sent another, number 3 if I remember correctly, to help us, but since you're asking, I'm assuming you have no idea where she's at and she didn't come with me. You know me. I would have gutted her, she says as Syen huffs and nods. Naruto sighs as he rubs the back of his head as he looks at her. He remembered when they had brought her to the Soul Society. She was going under hollowification when they managed to console her, which caused her to become the bloodthirsty reaper that she was now. Of course, because hollows had holes and needed something to fill them. She needed something to fill that loneliness and raw anger at other hollows and offered himself to her in a sense. Originally, he offered to train her, but when she kissed him is when their souls linked. They had needed a new name for what she was and no doubt they came up, he thought, was a good one, a sekirei. He had no idea why they came up with it, but it seemed to fit, and he became an ishikabi with his link with her. She despised hollows, to the point of becoming bloodthirsty at the sight of them. She did her job well as his number 3. But because of this link, they were essentially married and Syen hated it but accepted it. Hated her bloodthirsty battle, believing she wasn't worthy of the rank of number 3 but put aside her feelings to get the job done. Alright. God, this is going to be fun to explain to Ba-chan. He says, rubbing the back of his head as Karasuba walks over and pulls him into a deep kiss. Syen silently raging as she watched the wings sprout from her back at this. I'll cut down all of your enemies, my ishikabi, she whispers against his lips. Naruto sighs as he rubs the back of his head and looks at the two women across from him. Syen was currently bickering with the stoic woman, who had recently coated her blade in the blonde bomber's blood, and had no hesitation in doing it as well as he shook his head. He had told the others that she was another from the Fan family but otherwise that she, like Syen, swore fealty to him. Of course, this meant she had to go back with them to Konohagakure and get registered as a ninja. She of course had no issues with this. Syen and her had never gotten along as she was, as she said, the second division's attack dog, killing any defectors and helping whenever heavy combat was needed, but it was their personalities that clashed. The stoic and calm Syen and the bloodthirsty and battle-hungry Karasuba. Kakashi of course was eyeing her from the corner, weary of this new arrival even if he had vouched for her, and Sakura had greeted the woman who was surprisingly respectful for the bloodthirsty woman she was. When did his life get so complicated? He watched as Syen give up in trying to lecture the woman and huffs in exasperation before stomping her way back to her lover's side and stands, as he chuckles to himself and looks at her. You're working yourself up for no reason, B-chan. You know we don't have to worry about her, he says, rubbing her hair once more before her hand smacks his away. I still don't understand how you can have her in the second division. You should have given her to Kenpachi Taicho. Trust me, I've thought about it, B-chan. But at the same time, I knew what it was like. So I had a bit of sympathy for her, he says as she looks at him curiously at this. What do you mean, Naruto-sama? Well, have I told you how I met her? I don't think you have. She says as he chuckles a bit as he rifled through his memories. Remembering how he first had met Karasuba. Soul Society 200 years ago. Naruto huffed as he kicked the tree once more. Syen currently out on a mission with Yoruichi at the moment as he was currently shirtless, sweating as he looked at the bark-stripped tree from all the kicks he had been doing to it as he nodded in content. He was thankful that he still remembered the Uzumaki style that Jiraiya had taught him that many years ago and was able to master it to such a degree as he decided to take a break as he reaches out and grabs his bottle of water and takes a sip as he watches as the old man, as he called him, Captain Yamamoto, walk up to him with a woman just behind, her hands twitching occasionally. Old man? He asks him as he closed the water bottle, not bothering to slip on his captain's howry as the two, despite some of their differences in how they viewed things, saw each other as grandfather and grandson, much like how Hiruzen had been years ago. And just like how the friendly old men were, that also meant that they kept a lot of secrets, and that's one thing that always bugged him, but he squashed that at the moment as he focuses on the two that were standing in front of him. Good morning. The head captain calls out as Naruto walks up to them. I don't know if you had heard, but there has been an interesting development, he says as Naruto's eyes wandered over to the silver-haired woman as he nods. You see, she had begun the process of hollowification when we had performed a kanso on her. He says as Naruto nods at this. And what does that mean, old man? He asks her as he crosses his arms. We had sent her to Hana to be sure that she wasn't a hollow, and no, she isn't. However, the hollowification process has left a, shall we say, imprint on her soul. Young Karasuba here, her name, is feeling the cravings for hunter or lusting after something to fill that void, but it's not a ravenous hunger. We are hoping that you would be able to train her perhaps to refine that. So she's still 100% Shinigami, correct? I don't want to be surprised by a Sero one day because her training was meant for Shinigami, he asks as the head captain nods. Not to worry, she is, but we needed to classify this and they had classified her as a Sekirei, a plus who had began the transformation but was saved, he says. A wagtail? Naruto asks as he nods, adding with a shrug. I wasn't sure, I hadn't named her, I had to order Miyuri not to experiment on her, he says as he nods at the head captain. You had trained Soifun into a capable lieutenant, I am hoping that you will do the same with young Karasuba here, he explains as he nods. I'll certainly do my best, he says as the head nods in satisfaction as he turns on his heels and leaves the two alone as Naruto looked at the woman, whose hand was twitching occasionally. She needed to unlock her Zanpakuto too. Her spiritual energy for someone who hasn't been trained yet was massive, but it was still tiny compared to anyone who was trained. If she was trained correctly, she will be a force to be reckoned with. I know the old man had told me your name, but I want you to tell me, he says as he walks over to his clothes he had taken off to exercise before slipping them back onto his body before putting his haori back on and looks at the woman who walked up to him. He could tell that she wasn't shy but rather that she had a bloodthirsty look in her eyes, one he had seen before. I am Karasuba Taicho, she says giving a smile, but he saw that this smile didn't reach her eyes. End flashback. You've never told me this, Naruto-sama. Well, I didn't want you to look at her as something else than a Shinigami. You're right, I'm sorry. It's alright. It's in the past now. This caused him to chuckle as he remembered the amount of grueling and intensive training that would cause any of Kenpachi's men to sweat and be aching the day after. But she took it all in stride, saying how she'll use the power I give to her to slay any hollow that stood in her way. She was bloodthirsty and absolutely despised hollows for one reason or another. He suspected it was that hunger inside of her. Regardless, he trained her much like he did Soifun, and this caused her to often be fighting with the woman about how things should go. He didn't mind, as he had said before, she was her own woman who could fight her own battles, and as such he left her to them. Still, he wished that they didn't fight as much as they came for the solid goal of purifying hollows and keeping the Soul Society safe. He looked at her and chuckles to himself, remembering how exactly she became his Ashikabi, as they had called him. He still didn't understand these words, but he went along with it, deciding that it would be simply easier than questioning every little thing. Flashback. Naruto and Karasuba were, at the moment, facing down a couple hundred hollows at this point, having been set up by Aizen and led straight into an ambush, as he was sure Aizen was hoping to get rid of one of the strongest captains of the Gode 13. Both had their weapons drawn, back to back as he looks around. You know, if Urahara were here, he'd say that this was an excellent date, he says in a joking manner as he cuts down another hollow down, as he pants. Yes, well, I am having a fantastic time, she yells with a grin on her face as she cuts down two more. She was ashamed that these things couldn't bleed, as she would love to be covered in their blood at the moment, both her blade and her body, as she licks her lips and strikes at another. I see what my father saw, he mumbled to himself as he watched as Karasuba cut them down, reminding him of a bit of his mother, who was a fantastic Ken and Fuinjutsu user. And he admitted that he could see what his father saw in a woman who knew how to wield a blade and knew when to cut loose. However, he cursed when he felt two Vasto Lord-class hollows converging on their positions, as he knew he had to cut down their numbers even further if they wanted any chances at surviving. He had already flared his Ritsu, but it took a while for others to travel and it would get their backup. Is that all you have? She yelled as she struck down an Ajuka's class hollow. Give me a damn herc, she began before she was blasted by a Sero and into one of the buildings below, leaving a gash in the earth. Karasuba, Naruto calls out as he rushed over to her aid as he cut down any singular hollows that got in his way and makes his way over to her. As she was clutching her blade and panting, her clothes partially torn. "I'm alright, Taicho," she says as she stands. She felt her heart beating as she looks at him and looks at the Vasto lords who were searching for them as the Sero had kicked up a lot of dust and debris, causing them to have a momentary respite as Karasuba looks at her captain for another second. "Taicho, if we are to die here, grant me one thing," she says as this causes Naruto to look at her for a moment. "What's up, Kara?" she began before she felt his lips pressed against hers, which, really, wasn't what surprised him. What surprised him was the two gray wings behind her as he could feel their souls link, mix and merge as he relaxed into the kiss before kissing her back, his hand taking her cheeks and pulling her into a deeper kiss before eventually pulling away. He was about to ask what that was, but she beat him to it as she smirked, grabbing her blade. "This is the pledge of my blade, exterminate the sworn enemy of my Ashikabi," she says as she stood, as if she didn't take a Sero a few moments earlier. A grin on her face as she held the katana in her hands and looks at the two hollows. He wondered what an Ashikabi was, though he had a suspicion that the others had told her whoever she linked to her would be. Good lord, this woman just brought up some more questions than answers. Not that he was complaining one bit, as damn did she know how to swing a blade, and no doubt would look hot as hell covered in blood. "You're next," she yells as she took off after the Vasto lord who had launched her into a building, blade in hand and a determined look in her eyes and blood-crazed grin. Damn, she was hot. Flashback end. And since then, she and him, much like Soifan, were inseparable at this point, and this caused a lot of arguments between the two. One believing she wasn't worthy to be around her, now lover, and the other not giving an absolute damn what she thinks. She was secure in her own relationship with her Ashikabi and didn't need no midget to tell her that she couldn't be around him. Naruto sighs as he ran his hand through his hair once more before he heard a groan, as most of the room turned to see Gaara waking up once more. He had been awake before but not fully cognizant of what had happened or what went down as the doctors rushed over to his side to look him over. "I'm alright. Where is she?" Gaara asks as he sat up at the edge of the bed as he rubbed his arm, it absolutely sore, with the fight that he had to take part in and was almost kidnapped. "Who?" asks one of the doctors. "The woman who saved me," one of the doctors was about to respond when Karasuba stepped forward and looks at the leader, a neutral look on her face. "Right here," she says as Gaara looks at her up and down before standing and offering his hand. "Thank you then for saving me. I owe you a debt of gratitude that I know I won't be able to repay," he says as she looks at his hand before shaking it and smiles. "Naruto, of course," again, noting that the smile didn't reach her eyes, but didn't say otherwise. He knew how she was and loved her anyway, though he knew that Soifan and Karasuba would have to settle and bury the hatch eventually, as he knew that neither of them would back down from this as he sighs. He just hoped they didn't kill each other. "You should thank my Ashikabi-sama," she says pointing to Naruto. "He's the reason I'm even out this way, but you're welcome," she says as Gaara looks at Naruto, which he then gave a small smile. "Even when you're not around, Naruto, you're still around in your own way to save me," he says as he shook Naruto's hand as well. "You know me, Gaara. I'm always there for my friends in one way or another," he says with a small chuckle as Gaara looks at the woman once more. "I had passed out a moment after you had arrived. Would you mind recanting the story of how you bested Deidara?" he asks her. Sure," she says with a grin. Flashback. "Your executioner," she says as she had already pulled her blade from her sheath. She made no motion to move just yet before she raised her sword and pointed it at him. "I cannot let you leave with that boy. Shinigami and Ashikabi-sama have a vested interest in his survival," she says, hoping that he resisted so that she was able to coat her blade in his blood. "And who the hell are you on? I've never seen you in Bingo Book, so you must be a nobody. I'll just shove that sword down your throat, whatever's left on," he yelled as he threw some more clay explosives at her, to which she cut in half and jumped towards him, a grin on her face. "I know you're low on energy, which means your blood will coat my blade that much easier," she says with a grin as Deidara cursed and jumped onto the large bird that he had created and began to fly away. "I don't think so," she yells as she takes a step off one of the railings, sword in hand as she cuts the wings, causing the two to fall to the floor and to the streets below. "It'll make you a damn fine piece of art," he yells as he uses his chakra to make more explosives and began to throw them at her. He had already used most of his clay and chakra to fight the case cage, and now he was currently fighting a woman whose speed and strength with a blade were unmatched. "I'll make you a piece of art all right with your blood covering the walls," she yells as she cuts the explosives once more, able to push through the explosives as they were relatively weak as she took a slash at him as he stumbled back. As he looks down at his chest and groans, "There a deep gash in his chest and was missing an arm. He would pass out soon of blood loss if he didn't hurry and kill this bitch." Karasuba, usually not caring for the lives of others, reaches down and grabs Gaara now that she was standing over him from pushing the Iwa bomber back. "Oi!" she calls out to the ninja who were now standing above and around them on the roofs as she threw Gaara at them, as Kankuro catches him. "He needs medical attention. I'll handle this scum," she says as she flicks her blade and removes the blood that had ran down her blade from the slash from Deidara, before she took a step, then another before there was a flash of speed as she rushed him down, a manic grin on her face. "Just die," she yells as he made more clay explosives and began to throw them, this much larger than the last two attacks that she had thrown at her, as she had the sense to dodge them this time as they took out some of the buildings behind her. She cursed knowing they were causing collateral damage, but she could do nothing as she made a stab for his gut, only to be met with another explosive at point-blank range as it had sent her flying into one of the buildings, but him as well as he was so close to it. She stood and groans as she decided that she needed a boost in power as she took a breath. "This is the pledge of my blade. Exterminate the sworn enemy of my Ashikabi," she says quietly before a second later she again took off with more speed at him, holding her blade in a reverse grip as she made yet another strike at his chest as he managed to backpedal just in time to only get yet another gash as she continued her assault, leaving more cuts across his body before she kicks him into a clearing as he shakily stood on death's door as he looks up and snarls. "I'll kill you I'll kill every last one of you," he yells, knowing he wasn't going to get away alive at this point as he rips open his coat and rips something off his chest. Stitches looks like as she watches as the mouth opens. Some shinobi around them gagging at the sight of this as her face looked impassive, blood dripping to the floor as he shoves a rather large ball of clay. "I'll make the best damn work of art ever. I'll destroy the entirety of this village and leave a scar in the earth, and if that sandbrat dies, then too fucking bad he yells as lines ran over his body. 10 kilometers, this village will be gone, and the work of art will leave behind a legacy, he yells as he began to laugh as the lines across his body began to retract. "Nothing to say now, sword bitch?" he yells as he laughs more as the shinobi didn't know how to stop it, worried if they kill him it'll set off the explosive. "You talk too much," was all she said, and with a flash of her sword, he watched as his own body crumpled to the floor as his head crashed to the floor not too far away. She looked down as since the chakra had been cut off before the explosion had been released and contained, it went off like a regular tag, destroying the body as well as the head. It took a second for her body to register the pain before she coughs and fell to her knee, using her blade to keep her upright. She took too many chances charging him and taken too much damage from those explosives. She knew that if Naruto was watching that he would be chewing her out for taking needless risks and taking needless damage. Regardless, she was happy with the result as she felt the shinobi surround her. "Jin-san, are you alright?" Baki asks her as he motions for the medic ninja to come and heal her as she nods. Usually she didn't take this kind of help but decided to as that she would be able to meet her Ashikabi in one piece. "Karasuba," was all she said. Flashback end. "After that they treated my injuries and began to patch up my clothing and fed me, saying thank you and the like for saving you," she says, waving her hand with a smile on her face. "You can ask your friend Baki, I think his name was, to corroborate this story, otherwise, we just waited here for you to wake up," she explains as Gaara nods and looks at her. "If you're with Naruto-san, then I believe and trust you," he says with a smile as the blonde nods in thanks at this before he turned his gaze back at her. "You're always welcome back in Suna at any point, Karasuba-san," he says, shaking her hand once more. "I believe that mission is complete," he began before Kakashi spoke up. "Actually, if you guys want to take a bit more time after we've recovered, one of my ninkin smelled another just outside the walls. I think it's another one of the Akatsuki." This causes Naruto and Karasuba to look up and Soifun to look at the masked man. "How do you know it's him?" Karasuba said that he exploded, leaving nothing left for the ninkin to track, right? She asks as he shook his head. "I had some of my dogs look around for anything they can use and let me know they found some blood and scraps of the clothes," and it led outside the village to where they picked up yet another scent. We're still at 100% except for Karasuba-san here. We can use this opportunity to kill another one of the Akatsuki, he says as the others looked at one another for a long moment before Naruto took a step forward. I think we speak for all of us when we say that we'll go with you to take care of him, Naruto says as Kakashi nods, before looking at Sakura. Sakura, pack up on antidotes or anything to counteract poison. My ninkin said they smelled it on whatever was making that smell. I'm coming with you, Tamari says as she took a step forward. Tamari, are you sure? Gaara asks her as she nods and looks at him. I can't forgive what they had just done to you, and if I can take the chance to reduce the threat to your life and to the village then I will. Don't worry, we have Naruto-kun and Karasuba-san with us. We can handle whatever they throw at us, she says as Gaara looks at her for a long moment before nodding. Alright, look after Naruto. You too Naruto. Look after my sister, he says as he nods. Don't worry, I will. You get better, he says reaching out and patting his shoulders with a smile. With Tear Harabel and Co. The Great Naruto Bridge, she says looking at the absolutely massive bridge as well as the sign that stood, she was currently, and the two other Uzumaki, following the map. It seems they were only about 2 days away from Konoha at this point as she sighed softly. There were a few times they had run into some nuke nin or some sound nin who wanted the two of them back. I'm glad Snake Fucker can't control me at this point, she says as she rubs her neck. She remembered what Karen had told her, that all seals decay at different rates, and since this was the prototype before the one given to Sasuke, it practically became nothing more than a glorified tattoo, and since she could barely walk, Orochimaru didn't deem her worthy of the new seal, so she was left to rot along with Karen. I suppose Naruto-kun is quite famous, she says with a chuckle as she was staring at the same bridge as well, standing close by to Tayuya in case she needed help walking again. He is too back where I am from, she says with a chuckle as she motions for them to follow, and they did just that as they walked down the bridge, some people of course looking at them in their dress of attire. Not that she could blame them, her clothes didn't exactly leave much to the imagination and people were of course attracted to people like her, not that she minded really, it was natural. It was only when they did something without permission when she had a problem with someone's lusts. And she would promptly freeze or gut them or drown them. She having done that to a few hollows back in Hueco Mundo. She shivered lightly as that name now left a bad taste in her mouth as she sighed to herself. She was glad that her fracciones are able to rest peacefully now. What do you want with Naruto-kun anyway? Karen asks her curiously, hoping that she didn't kill her clan member, though from the feeling she got that wouldn't be the case as they continued to walk the bridge as once more. Tear had to be chose her next words carefully as she looks at Karen for a second before looking back straight ahead. Shinigami-sama has taken interest in him and his abilities and wants to ensure something comes to pass. I cannot say more than that and risk things more, she says as the two of them look at the espada like she grew a second head as they soon shook it off. Do not worry, I will not harm Naruto, she says having a feeling what was on the girl's mind. Naruto? You said Naruto? Asked a little kid who stood across the street and walks over. We did, and who are you? You little Xiao? She began only to be smacked in the back of the head by Karen who could already see the curse coming from a mile away. She didn't want to have to deal with angry people because Tayuya couldn't control her mouth. We are looking for Naruto Uzumaki. I had found some of his family and wished to introduce them to one another, Tear says stepping forward to the small child. He around 12 or so from what she can guess as she looks down at the boy. You sure? Aniki had blonde hair, he says rubbing the back of his head as he looked at the two of them. I will beat you senseless brat. I am a damn Uzumaki. Tayuya yells at the little kid before being smacked again by Karen. Ow damn it, stop hitting me or I will drown you in the damn river below, she says as the little kid raises his hands. Alright, my name is Inari. I'll take you over to my mom's place. It is getting pretty late, he says as he motions for them to follow. What are your names? He asks putting his fingers behind his head, much how he had seen Naruto do that many years prior and he supposed it stuck with him at this point. My name is Tear Harabel. This is Tayuya and Karen Uzumaki, she says introducing them as he nods at this. Well, good to meet you girls I guess. My house isn't too far from here. Thank you for your hospitality Inari-kun. Karen says with a smile, she says before hitting Tayuya in the ribs. Ow, yeah, thanks Gaki. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.